He hadn't felt anything in years. Then he heard her voice through a cracked door. Inside, a woman who weighed more than his best men was humming a melody that had been dead for 20 years. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He just stood there. Dominic Castera stood in the hallway of his own penthouse, like a stranger who'd wandered into someone else's home. His hand gripped the doorframe, knuckles white, tendons drawn tight under the matte black face of his Patek Philippe. In his other hand, a glass of Macallan 18 he'd poured 6 minutes ago. It was going warm. He hadn't raised it once. Through the 2-inch gap in the door, a sound he couldn't name was doing something to his chest he couldn't stop. A woman humming. Low, soft, a lullaby that belonged to kitchens with flour on the counter and screen doors banging shut in summer. Not here. Not in a $14 million residence on the Gold Coast where men discussed body counts over breakfast. His pale, steel-gray eyes, almost colorless in the hallway's dim light, didn't blink. His jaw was set so tight, a muscle jumped beneath his ear. The Macallan trembled once in the glass. That was all. That was everything. 3 days earlier, Nora Calloway had a job. She sat in the back row of Conference Room B at Whitmore Logistics, a mid-tier Chicago shipping outfit operating out of a dreary glass box near the river. Oversized, heather gray cardigan pulled tight across her chest, plain white cotton blouse underneath, dark navy stretch pants she'd bought 2 sizes up so the waistband wouldn't dig during long sits, scuffed beige canvas flats tucked under her chair like she was trying to hide her feet from the room. The thin gold chain at her collarbone, tiny round locket resting in the hollow of her throat, caught the fluorescent light every time she breathed. She'd rebuilt their entire shipping algorithm, 4 months of late nights, cold takeout containers stacked on her desk, 17 iterations of a route optimization model that cut regional delivery costs by 22%. 22%. That number had saved Whitmore Logistics somewhere north of $1.6 million in the last quarter alone. And right now, Glenn Whitmore was standing at the front of the room in his ill-fitting khaki suit jacket and stained yellow tie, his chipped white ceramic mug in one hand, his other hand waving at the projection of her model, taking credit for every single line of it. "This is what happens when leadership gets proactive," Glenn said, watery blue eyes scanning the room with that chin-tilted smugness, wire-rimmed gold glasses catching the light. "We identified the inefficiencies. We built the solution." We. Nora's hazel green eyes dropped to her lap, her plump fingers twisted in the hem of her cardigan, her rounded cheeks flushed pink under the golden scatter of freckles across her nose and cheekbones. Of course, the girl in the back helped with some of the data entry. Glenn gestured vaguely in her direction without looking at her, the same way you'd gesture at a piece of furniture you were thinking about replacing. A few heads turned. Someone in the second row smirked. Data entry. She'd written 11,000 lines of code. That was Tuesday. By Thursday, Glenn didn't even bother with a private office. He walked to her desk in the open-plan bullpen at 2:47 p.m., with HR trailing behind him like a shadow he'd rented for the afternoon. 36 people within earshot, every one of them suddenly very interested in their screens while listening to every word. "Nora, we're restructuring." He set the chipped mug on the edge of her desk, arms crossed, weak chin lifted. "And frankly, Nora, you don't fit, in any sense of the word." He said it with a little smile, like he'd been saving it, like he'd workshopped that line in the shower. Someone behind her laughed. Not loud, just enough. Nora felt it everywhere, the heat climbing her neck, flooding her soft, rounded jaw, burning behind her eyes. She felt her heavy thighs pressing together under the desk, felt the cardigan stretching across her broad hips, felt the width of herself in the chair, the space she took up, the way his eyes had measured her and found the number wanting. Her shoulders curved inward, that familiar hunch, chin dipping, hands clasped tight in her lap, everything pulling toward center like she could fold herself small enough to disappear. She didn't cry. She packed a single banker's box. Nobody said goodbye. Her apartment was a studio off Pulaski, $1,200 rent due in 9 days. She set the box on the kitchen counter next to a stack of envelopes she'd stopped opening. $87 in checking, $43,000 in student debt from a logistics degree that had gotten her 4 years of being called the girl in the back. She sat on the edge of her bed and scrolled job boards until her eyes burned, sending her resume into the void of automated rejection filters. Then, a strange listing. Live-in household manager for a private residence. $9,500 per month. Discretion required. No photo, no company name, just a phone number. She applied because she had 9 days and $87 and nothing left to lose. The interview happened at the Drake Hotel penthouse, and it was nothing like she expected. No one asked about cooking or cleaning. A wall of a man, 6'5", shaved head, hands like catcher's mitts, sat across from her at a marble table and asked about supply chain bottlenecks, inventory rotation, fleet scheduling for a 13-vehicle operation. Nora answered every question without pausing. 12-point distribution matrix, rolling restocks indexed to seasonal variants, GPS fleet tracking with predictive maintenance windows. The wall of a man blinked once, made a phone call that lasted 11 seconds, and told her she was hired. She started the next morning in the household of Dominic Castera, a name she Googled and found almost nothing about. That should have been the warning. The scale of it hit her in waves. A $40,000 wine collection behind climate-controlled glass, a Rolls-Royce in the underground garage that no one ever seemed to drive, men in charcoal suits who moved through hallways without speaking and never smiled. On her second night, she learned the reason for the live-in requirement. Anton, Dominic's 19-year-old nephew and legal ward, who hadn't slept through a full night in 2 years. Severe insomnia, worse anxiety. He paced the penthouse at 3 a.m. like a ghost with a pulse. Nora did what her grandmother had done. She hummed. Low, soft, a melody without words that filled the space like warm water. Anton settled on the couch. His breathing slowed. She tucked a cashmere throw over his shoulders and walked to the kitchen. She caught her reflection in the dark window, saw only the width, the heaviness, the broad hips and thick waist, and the space she took up against the glass. Her fingers found the locket at her collarbone, pressing it into her skin. Then a voice behind her. Low, definitive, not a question. You stay. The words hung in the dark kitchen like smoke. You stay. 2 syllables that rearranged something fundamental inside Nora Calloway's chest, something she couldn't name yet and wasn't ready to examine. She didn't sleep much after that, lay in a guest bed that cost more than her entire apartment deposit, staring at a ceiling she couldn't see, fingers wrapped around the thin gold chain at her collarbone, the tiny round locket warm against her skin. Wondering what stay meant, wondering what the catch was. There was always a catch. Morning came cold and bright through floor-to-ceiling windows, and when Nora padded into the kitchen on bare feet, still in yesterday's stretched-out heather-gray cardigan over her wrinkled white blouse, dark navy stretch pants creased at the knees, scuffed beige flats left somewhere by the door, Dominic Castera was already there, seated at the kitchen island, black coffee, Wall Street Journal open flat beside him, not folded, because men like him didn't fold newspapers. They spread them out and took up the whole damn counter. His charcoal Tom Ford vest hugged his lean frame without a single wrinkle. The matte black Patek Philippe on his left wrist caught the morning light every time he turned a page. Jet black hair slicked back with that precise, barbered perfection. Pale, steel-gray eyes fixed on newsprint. He didn't look up when she entered, but he spoke. Full sentences this time, which felt like something seismic. There's coffee in the carafe. Cream's in the door of the refrigerator. How do you take your eggs? Not a question. A statement shaped like one. His voice was low, unhurried, the cadence of a man who had never once been interrupted. Nora's thick fingers found each other, clasping and unclasping at her sides. Her rounded cheeks flushed that telltale warm pink, the golden freckles across her nose suddenly vivid against the color. You don't have to. I'm sorry, I'll stay out of your way. I don't want to take up. Sit down. Eat. 3 words. Flat. Final. He still hadn't looked at her. She didn't sit. Her body physically locked. Because sitting at that counter meant occupying space next to him, and every cell in Nora's body had been trained, by Glenn Whitmore, by every sideways glance on the L train, by a lifetime of pulling her elbows in and making herself smaller, to not do that, to shrink, to apologize for the square footage her hips required. Dominic didn't repeat himself. He reached across the marble island, picked up a plate, scrambled eggs, thick-cut toast, sliced avocado, actual food prepared by actual hands, and pushed it 2 feet across the counter until it sat directly in front of the empty stool beside him. Then he went back to reading. The silence wasn't aggressive. It was patient, like he had decided she was going to eat, and time was simply a formality. Nora sat. The stool held her. Her soft, wide curves settled against the leather seat, her heavy thighs pressing together, and she picked up a fork with a hand that barely trembled. She ate. He turned a page. That was the whole scene, and it rewired something in her brain she didn't even know was broken. By 10 that morning, Dominic's people had given her a task: organize supply invoices for what they called import businesses, stacks of paper, manila folders fat with receipts, purchase orders, shipping manifests from 3 companies she'd never heard of. Boring work. Busy work, probably. The kind of task you hand someone to keep them quiet and out of the way. Except Nora Calloway had spent 4 years doing forensic logistics for a man who didn't deserve her, and her brain didn't know how to not see patterns. 40 minutes in, she found the first discrepancy. A container shipment billed at $340,000 that should have cost $185,000 based on weight and route. She flagged it, kept going, found another, then a cascade. Duplicate invoices across 2 of the shell companies, ghost shipments that existed on paper but matched no port records, fees paid to freight companies that didn't appear in any commercial registry. $4.2 million. Gone. Evaporated across 3 entities like steam. Her hazel green eyes went wide. Her honey blonde waves fell forward as she hunched over the laptop, fingers flying. 90 minutes. She built a spreadsheet that mapped every discrepancy, cross-referenced shipping dates with Port Authority records she pulled from public databases, and color-coded the hemorrhage by shell company. Red, orange, yellow. A heat map of theft. She printed it. 12 pages. Stared at them in her lap for a full minute, heart hammering, the small birthmark below her left ear pulsing with her elevated heartbeat. Then she walked to Dominic's office uninvited. The door was heavy dark wood. She knocked too softly, knocked again, pushed it open with her shoulder because her hands were full and shaking. He was behind a mahogany desk, Macallan 18 in a crystal glass at his right hand, the amber liquid untouched. The room smelled like aged leather and something faintly sharp, expensive cologne, the kind that doesn't announce itself but lingers. 2 men stood across from him. Both flinched when she entered, then looked confused, then dismissed her. I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't but I found something. In the invoices. The numbers don't. Her voice crumbled at the edges. She held out the spreadsheet like a shield. Dominic took it. Those pale, steel-gray eyes scanned the first page, the second, 10 seconds total. His expression didn't change. Not one muscle. That strong, square jaw, that straight Roman nose, those thick, dark eyebrows set low over deep-set eyes, all perfectly, terrifyingly still. How long did this take you? About an hour and a half. Silence. The kind of silence that cost someone their career, because his chief accountant had been grinding on this for 11 weeks. 11 weeks and nothing. This woman in a wrinkled cardigan with toast crumbs on her sleeve had just detonated his entire financial audit in 90 minutes. Leave it, he said, meaning the spreadsheet, meaning stay. She turned to go and nearly collided with Katya Morova in the doorway. platinum white blonde hair, bone straight, ice blue eyes, a fitted black Givenchy blazer over white silk, the thin gold bangle on her right wrist catching light. Katya was 5'9", angular, sharp collarboned, and she looked at Nora the way you'd look at a stain on upholstery. "Dominic," that pointed chin lifted, "you're not serious. You're putting the nanny on financials?" Her ice blue gaze dragged down Nora's body, the soft, wide hips, the thick waist, the full figure straining against that oversized cardigan, and back up. "She can barely fit behind the desk." A sentence designed to make a woman disappear, to reduce a human being to the space between her body and furniture. Dominic set his Macallan down. Slowly, the crystal base met the mahogany with a sound like a period at the end of a death sentence. He didn't speak, didn't blink. Those pale, gray eyes fixed on Katya with the flat patience of a man deciding whether something was worth the effort of destruction. 4 seconds, 4 full seconds of silence. Katya went pale. The porcelain drained to paper white. The beauty mark on her upper right cheekbone stood out like a punctuation mark on a blank page. She swallowed once, turned on her pointed black patent Louboutins, and walked out without another word. She never said it again in his presence. Nora stood frozen in the doorway, cheeks burning, plump lips pressed tight, fingers white-knuckled around the 3 binders she'd already reorganized: vendor contracts, freight manifests, quarterly reconciliations. Work his accountant couldn't finish in 3 months, completed in 2 hours by a woman everyone kept telling to take up less space. Dominic watched her walk out, watched the way her broad hips moved through the doorframe without apology, watched the honey-blonde waves bounce against her shoulders, the faint birthmark below her left ear disappearing as she turned the corner. He picked up his phone. 1 word. Promoter. 2 weeks changed everything. Not the world, not yet, but the woman inside it. Nora Calloway hadn't left the penthouse in 14 days. She didn't need to. Everything she required was already there. Encrypted server access, triple-monitored terminals, a mahogany desk the size of a small boat, and a silence so absolute she could hear her own thoughts click into place like tumblers in a vault. 16-hour days, sometimes 18. Coffee gone cold on the corner of the desk next to her thin gold locket she'd unclasped to keep from fidgeting with it while she worked. And work. That was the thing about Nora that Glenn Whitmore never bothered to see. She didn't just work. She dismantled systems and rebuilt them while they were still running. In 14 days, she mapped every supply chain Dominic Castera's organization touched. Every port, every warehouse, every middleman with a handshake deal and a burner phone. She color-coded them. She cross-referenced shipping manifests against customs filings, against payment ledgers that hadn't been reconciled in over a year. 3 moles. She found 3 separate operatives skimming product, one in the Queens distribution hub, one at a freight consolidator in Newark, one buried inside the accounting team itself, doctoring invoices by fractions of a cent that compounded into 6 figures over 8 months. She flagged them, documented everything, built a prosecutable trail so clean it could have stood up in federal court. Except federal court was not where Dominic Castera resolved his problems. The accounting ledger, the real one, not the fiction his previous bookkeeper had been maintaining, she rebuilt from scratch. Every transaction backtraced to origin, every dollar accounted for to the penny. Her hazel green eyes stayed fixed on the glow of the screen, and her thick honey blonde waves stayed tucked behind her ears, and her soft, rounded cheeks stayed flushed from concentration, not shame, not anymore. She started speaking in full sentences. No apology at the end, no trailing off, no waiting for someone to interrupt, and she started standing up straighter. On the morning of day 12, Nora opened her bedroom door and found 3 garment boxes stacked on the floor, matte black, heavy cardboard, no store logos visible, just embossed initials from ateliers that didn't advertise because they didn't need to. Tom Ford, Stella McCartney, A custom Italian label she didn't recognize, but whose fabric, when she lifted the tissue paper, felt like water poured over her fingers. Not a single item was a size smaller than she wore. Every piece was her size, exactly her size 20, cut for her broad hips, her thick waist, her full, heavy thighs, tailored as though someone had taken her measurements while she slept, which, knowing this penthouse, someone probably had. A card sat in the first box. Cream stock, black ink. Dominic's handwriting, sharp and angular like the man himself. "You represent me now." 4 words. No signature needed. Nora lifted out a fitted deep navy dress with structured shoulders and a hemline that hit just below her knee. She held it against her body, stepped into the bathroom, looked at herself in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger. Same golden freckles scattered across the bridge of her small, upturned nose, same soft, dimpled cheeks, same warm flush of pink across fair skin. But the posture, shoulders pulled back, chin level, hazel green eyes steady, that was new. The dress fit like it had been sculpted around her, not hiding her body, framing it. She didn't recognize herself. She put the dress on anyway. That night, past 11, the city glittering 40 stories below, Nora was still at the desk, hadn't eaten since a protein bar at 2 in the afternoon. The numbers were close, so close. 1 more hour and she'd have the full picture of where the $4.2 million had gone. The door opened without a knock. Dominic walked in carrying a brown paper bag from Alinea, a restaurant where dinner cost $200 and reservations required 6 weeks' notice. He set the bag in front of her keyboard, pulled out containers. Wagyu, seared foie gras, a glass jar of something green and fragrant, set a fork beside her hand. She didn't look up. Her fingers kept moving across the spreadsheet. "I'm not hungry." "You haven't eaten in 9 hours. His voice was flat, not angry, factual. He leaned against the edge of the desk, his matte black Patek Philippe catching the lamplight. His pale, steel-gray eyes watched her the way a man watches a fire he built, with ownership and patience. "You don't skip meals in my house." Nora's hand stopped. Her gaze dropped to the food, then to her own lap, to the navy dress stretched across her thick thighs. Old programming kicked in, the voice that sounded like Glenn Whitmore, like every sideways glance in every break room, like her mother saying, "Maybe just a salad, sweetheart. People like me aren't supposed to eat." 1 word, a command that hit like a door slamming shut on every ugly thing anyone had ever said about her body and food, and whether she deserved to enjoy both. "You take up exactly the space you are meant to." First time those words landed as truth instead of mockery. Something cracked open behind her ribs. She picked up the fork. She ate. He stayed. Neither of them spoke again, and neither of them needed to. By 3 in the morning, she had it. The $4.2 million discrepancy didn't end at internal skimming. It was a pipeline, a deliberate funnel, routing cash through Dominic's own supply chain into the accounts of a rival syndicate. A competing operation had been laundering money through his infrastructure for 8 months, and the man holding the door open was a lieutenant named Reeves. Trusted, senior, sitting in on strategy meetings while selling route intelligence to the competition for a cut so consistent it showed up as a pattern once you knew where to look. Nora printed everything, bound it, built projected spreadsheets and printed binders with dollar amounts down to the cent. $4.2 million stolen, $11 million in annual inefficiencies she'd already corrected. The next afternoon, she walked into a conference room full of Dominic's lieutenants, 12 men in expensive suits who'd smirked at her 2 weeks ago. She set binders in front of each chair, pulled up the projections, spoke for 22 minutes without a single stammer, without a single apology, without once making herself smaller. When she finished, the silence was absolute. Dominic stood against the back wall, arms crossed, his charcoal Tom Ford jacket pulling slightly across his broad shoulders. His steel-gray eyes hadn't left her once. "Any questions?" No one spoke. Katya Morova is losing ground, and she knows it. The woman she called a pig is now running the financial spine of Dominic's empire, and it is eating her alive. See, Katya had a system. She'd spent 3 years building proximity to Dominic Castera, positioning herself as indispensable, the one who knew the right people, who whispered the right names into his ear at the right moments, who stood beside him at galas in her fitted black Givenchy blazer and pointed Louboutin heels with her chin elevated like she owned the air above everyone else's heads. That thin gold bangle on her right wrist caught the light every time she gestured, and she gestured a lot because Katya Morova had made a career out of being seen. Now she's being replaced. Not officially. Worse. Organically. The lieutenants don't look at her first anymore when numbers come up. They look at Nora. So Katya does what Katya does best. She poisons the well. Behind closed doors, in hallways, in private calls, in the back seats of town cars, she starts planting. Small at first, reasonable sounding. Are we sure about this level of access for someone we've known 3 weeks? Then sharper. She pulls one of Dominic's senior lieutenants aside after a briefing, her ice blue eyes flat and cold, that beauty mark on her upper right cheekbone almost twitching with the effort of keeping her composure civil. He's thinking with something other than his brain, she says. That woman is a pig in couture. She lets the word sit there. Pig. Like it's a clinical diagnosis. She's a liability, a target. Every rival we have takes one look at her and sees the weak link. That's the thing about contempt dressed in strategy. It sounds like concern. Meanwhile, in the penthouse library at 2 a.m, the actual weak link is dismantling Dominic's personal account structure and rebuilding it from scratch. Nora's honey blonde waves are tucked loosely behind her ears, a few strands falling forward as she leans over 3 open laptops and a spread of printed statements. The gold locket sits at her collarbone, catching low lamplight. She's in the custom-tailored charcoal dress from earlier, shoes kicked off under the desk, her thick waist pressed against the edge of the table as she works. She doesn't hear him come in. Nobody ever hears Dominic come in. He stands behind her, too close. Close enough that she catches it. Sandalwood and smoke, that cologne that probably costs more per ounce than her old monthly rent. Her body responds before her mind does, heat climbing her neck, flushing those rounded cheeks pink above the scatter of golden freckles across her nose. She doesn't turn around. He reaches past her for a file on the desk. His hand grazes her hip. Full contact, the heel of his palm against the curve of her, and neither of them moves. 3 seconds. 5. The matte black Patek Philippe on his left wrist is the only thing in her peripheral vision. "You're the most dangerous person in this building," he says. She laughs, nervous, breathy, automatic, the old reflex, deflect with self-deprecation before someone else does it for you. He doesn't laugh. Those pale, steel-gray eyes don't even blink. He meant every word like a blood oath. 2 nights later, she twists her ankle on the penthouse stairs. New heels, custom, beautiful, and apparently determined to kill her. She catches herself on the railing, pain shooting up her calf, and immediately starts the performance, waving him off. I'm fine, I'm too heavy, just let me." He lifts her. No grunt, no shift of weight, no theatrical display of effort, just his arms under her knees and around her back, her full 230 pounds gathered against his chest like she weighs exactly what he expected, and he'd been waiting for the excuse. He carries her down the remaining stairs and across the living room to the couch, sets her down with surgical care. His hand stays on her waist, that thick waist she's spent her whole life trying to hide behind oversized cardigans, and his thumb traces one slow line along the curve of her hip. "Don't ever tell me what you weigh," he says. "I already know, and I want every ounce of it." She doesn't laugh this time. Then Glenn Whitmore crawls back out of whatever damp hole he'd been hiding in, Nora's old boss, the ruddy-faced, weak-chinned, jowl-heavy waist of a khaki suit. Turns out Glenn has been busy. He's been shopping Nora's routing algorithm, the one she built on her own time, on her own equipment, with her own genius, trying to sell it to a logistics firm for $600,000. And because Glenn Whitmore has never once in his miserable life taken responsibility for his own mediocrity, he's also filed a civil suit claiming Nora stole company property. The papers arrive at the penthouse on a Tuesday morning. Nora reads them in the kitchen, standing at the counter, and something collapses inside her. Not rage, something older, that familiar gravitational pull back down to where she started, the hunched shoulders, the dipped chin, the hands clasped tight. Maybe she doesn't belong here. Maybe Glenn was right all along and she's just a fat girl playing dress-up in a world that was never built for someone shaped like her. Dominic finds the papers 20 minutes later. He reads them standing perfectly still, military straight, hands at his sides. His jaw sets. That's it. No shouting, no thrown glass, no dramatic declaration. Just the quiet of a man deciding exactly how much damage to inflict. He makes one phone call. Within 48 hours, a forensic audit of Whitmore Logistics reveals that Glenn has been embezzling $4.2 million from his own company. The small noise, one petty lawsuit filed by a petty man. The catastrophic failure, a paper trail so sloppy that a first-year forensic accountant could have found it, except nobody ever bothered to look because Glenn was the boss, and bosses don't get audited by the people beneath them. Until someone above him decides they should. The civil suit evaporates. Glenn Whitmore is facing federal charges. His lawyer won't return his calls. Nora should feel safe. She almost does. It's Thursday evening, 9:45, when she steps into the parking garage beneath the Ritz-Carlton after a business dinner. Her heels echo against concrete. The garage is quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that has weight to it. A black SUV pulls up fast, headlights cutting across the pillars. Two men step out. Before she can scream, a hand covers her mouth. Katya's voice crackles through a phone on speaker, triumphant and razor-thin. "Bring me the pig. Let's see how much she's really worth to him." The zip ties bit into her wrists, hard enough to leave welts. Nora's custom dress, the midnight blue one Dominic's tailor had fitted to every curve of her body just 3 weeks ago, was torn at the left shoulder where one of the men had grabbed her, the fabric hanging loose against her flushed pink skin. But the gold locket still sat at her collarbone. They hadn't taken it. They hadn't even noticed it. That was their first mistake. The warehouse smelled like diesel and old concrete. South Side. She knew that much from the drive. 14 minutes, 2 left turns after the expressway ramp, the sound of a rail yard close enough to rattle the walls. Her hazel green eyes moved behind half-closed lids, cataloging. The shipping labels on the stacked crates to her right read codes she recognized instantly. Meridian Logistics, hub routing through Gary, Indiana. The same distribution chain she'd flagged in Dominic's intercepted data 6 days ago. These weren't random muscle. These were Volkov's people. The men's watches told her the rest. Cheap chronographs, knockoff Breitlings with misaligned bezels, low-level operators, paid enough to grab a woman from a parking garage, but not enough to be trusted with anything that mattered. The burner phone sitting on the folding table 4 feet from her right hand was unsecured. No case, no pin lock visible on the cracked screen. She could see the green notification light blinking. Nora's thick waist pressed against the chair back. Her heavy thighs were numb from the metal seat. Her honey-blonde hair had fallen forward across her rounded cheeks, and her hands were shaking behind her. But her mind was a machine running clean and cold, and it was doing what it always did, reading the room like a spreadsheet, turning chaos into columns. The bay door scraped open 20 minutes later. Victor Kazan walked in like he owned the concrete he stood on. Tall, narrow-faced, leather jacket over a black turtleneck. The kind of man who practiced looking dangerous in mirrors. Volkov's underboss. He pulled a chair across the floor with a shriek of metal and sat down facing her, close enough that she could smell cheap cologne and cigarette smoke. He looked her up and down, slowly, the way Glenn Whitmore used to look at her across the conference table at Whitmore Lacey, except with less pretense and more teeth. "So this is Castera's pet?" He said it to his men first, getting the laugh he wanted. Then he leaned forward. "I don't see what he sees in you. Maybe he likes something to hold on to." That line hung in the air like a slap. Nora's hands shook harder behind the zip ties. Her chin dipped. Instinct, old habit, the muscle memory of making herself smaller. But her eyes stayed level, because behind those hazel-green irises, she wasn't hearing Victor at all. She was reading the invoices printed on the crate labels 6 feet behind his left shoulder. Routing numbers, dollar amounts, dates, and the numbers didn't match. Across the city, in the penthouse at the Drake Hotel, Dominic Castera set his glass of Macallan 18 down on the glass side table. It cracked. The table, not the glass. A spiderweb fracture radiating out from the base of the tumbler like a gunshot through ice. He didn't raise his voice. That was the thing his men would talk about later, the silence. Dominic stood in the center of the room, with his heavy, matte black Patek Philippe catching the overhead light, his pale, steel-gray eyes fixed on the head of his security detail, and he said 3 words. "Find her. Now." Not a shout, not a threat, just gravity, the kind of quiet that makes armed men flinch. His men scattered like roaches when the lights come on. 12 calls in 90 seconds. Every asset in Chicago activated. One of them, a former Marine named Sal who'd been with Dominic for 9 years, said later to another crew member, voice low, hands still not steady, "I've watched him end people without blinking. This was the first time I thought he might burn the whole city down." He wasn't wrong, but Dominic's men weren't the ones who saved her. Back in the warehouse, Nora lifted her chin. She looked past Victor, who was still performing his little power play, pacing, monologuing about Dominic's territory, and she locked eyes with the lieutenant standing by the crates. Younger guy, harder eyes than the others, but a nervous jaw, the one who'd driven the SUV. "Those shipments through Gary," Nora said. Her voice was quiet, shaking at the edges, but clear. "The Meridian routing. Your boss moved $3.2 million through that chain in the last quarter." The lieutenant's jaw stopped moving. Victor turned. "Shut her up." "But here's the thing." Nora kept her gaze on the lieutenant. Her plump lips barely moved. The golden freckles across her small, upturned nose caught the overhead fluorescent like tiny sparks. He skimmed it. From his own people. From you. The per-unit payments on those invoices don't match the wholesale rates filed with the Port Authority. I saw the intercepted data. The margin difference on 840 containers is $3.2 million, and none of it went into your operational accounts. Dead silence. The lieutenant looked at Victor. Victor's face went tight. "Your boss stole from you," Nora said simply. "I can prove it. I already did the math." 20 minutes. That's all it took. 20 minutes of Nora talking numbers, specific numbers, dollar amounts with decimal points, routing codes from memory, dates she'd absorbed from Dominic's intelligence files like breathing, and the lieutenant cut her zip ties with a box cutter from the workbench. He slid the burner phone across the table. She called Dominic's head of security, gave him the warehouse address, the number of men, 6 inside, 2 at the north entrance, and the entry points she'd mapped from the window positions and the shadow angles on the floor. When Dominic's convoy breached the bay doors 8 minutes later, half the warehouse was already open. The lieutenant had rolled the main door up himself. 2 of Victor's men were sitting against the wall with their hands visible, looking at their own boss like strangers. And Nora was sitting at the folding table with her hands folded in front of her. The torn dress, the gold locket at her throat, her honey blonde hair pushed back behind her ears. Calm. Dominic walked through the door. His charcoal Tom Ford suit was immaculate. His steel-gray eyes found her and stopped. "I did the math," she said. He stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then his voice came low, absolute, final. "You are mine, and nobody touches what is mine." Dominic takes Nora back to the penthouse himself. Not in the Rolls-Royce, not with his men. He drives. A matte black Audi RS7 that smells like leather and Macallan and the faintest trace of gunpowder. and he doesn't say a word as they pull out of the warehouse district and onto Lower Wacker. His right hand finds her thigh before they hit the first turn. Not grabbing, not taking, keeping. His palm flat against the soft fullness of her leg through the fabric of those dark navy stretch pants, thumb resting still against the curve of her knee, and he just leaves it there. The whole drive. 22 minutes through a city that has no idea what just happened inside its bones. Nora rests her head against the cool glass of the passenger window. Honey blonde waves pressed flat on one side, a few strands falling forward across her flushed, rounded cheeks, the thin gold chain at her collarbone catching streetlight in small flashes. She's exhausted. Her wrists still ache from the zip ties. Her voice is hoarse. And she doesn't apologize. Not for the trouble, not for the mess, not for the fact that an entire rival syndicate tried to use her as leverage, and she turned it inside out before his men even breached the door. That's new. She feels it in her own silence, the absence of the old reflex. The sorry, the "I know this is a lot," the automatic shrinking. It just isn't there anymore, and she doesn't go looking for it. They reach the building. Underground parking, private elevator bay, concrete and fluorescent light. Dominic kills the engine, walks around to her side, opens the door. Nora swings her legs out and starts to stand. He doesn't let her. His arms go under her knees and around her back, and he lifts her. All 230 pounds of her, the full, soft weight of her body against his chest, and carries her from the car to the elevator like she's made of something he can't afford to set down. The matte black Patek Philippe on his left wrist catches the light as he presses the penthouse button with his elbow. She doesn't protest. She loops her arms around his neck and lets him. The penthouse is dark, except for the ambient glow of the skyline through floor-to-ceiling glass. He carries her past the living room, past the operations table still covered in her spreadsheets, past the doorway where he first heard her voice dismantling his logistics over a phone call, straight to the master bathroom. Marble floors, diptyque candles already lit. Someone on his staff anticipated this, because his people anticipate everything when it involves her now. Towels that cost $400 folded on a heated rack. He sets her down gently on the edge of the tub and turns the water on. Steam rises. She watches his hands, the same hands that have done terrible things, test the temperature like it matters more than anything else in the world. Nora hesitates at the bathroom door when he steps back. Her shoulders curve inward. Old habit. The oversized heather gray cardigan is gone, lost somewhere in the warehouse, and she's standing in just the plain white cotton blouse, wrinkled and torn at one sleeve, and she looks at the marble and the candles and the impossible luxury of it all, and she says quietly, "I'm not the help anymore." It comes out like a question. Dominic leans against the doorframe, those pale, steel-gray eyes steady on her face. "No." "Then what am I?" "You're the reason any of this still exists." 7 words. She feels every single one land in her chest like a heartbeat she forgot she had. Across town, Katya Morova is having a very different evening. Dominic's men picked her up 40 minutes ago. She's sitting in a concrete room. No windows, one table, one chair, fluorescent buzz overhead, and the thin gold bangle on her right wrist catches ugly light as she stares at what they've spread in front of her. Bank transfers. 17 of them. Recorded phone calls with timestamps that match every leak in Dominic's operation over the past 6 months. Communications from Viktor Lenkov's people naming her. By name, by role, by the exact dollar amounts she was paid, as their inside contact. Katya Morova, who called Nora a pig, who called her a liability, who looked at a woman sitting quietly at a table running numbers and saw nothing worth respecting. She will never work in any organization again, not Dominic's, not anyone's. She'll be allowed to leave Chicago with exactly what she brought into it, which is nothing. The last thing she hears before the door closes is one of Dominic's men, calm, almost bored, saying, "The woman you called a pig just saved his entire empire. You couldn't even save yourself." That door shuts with a sound like a coffin lid. Within 72 hours, Viktor Lenkov's syndicate is functionally dead. Nora's forensic accounting work, the spreadsheets, the pattern recognition, the months of data she mapped from memory and whispered calculations, gave Dominic enough financial intelligence to freeze $3 billion in rival assets through back-channel pressure on 3 banks. $3 billion. Gone. Not with bullets, not with threats, with spreadsheets. Nora Calloway did with a laptop and her own relentless mind what Dominic's entire operation couldn't accomplish by any other means. She's standing in the penthouse kitchen hours later, wearing his shirt, a white Tom Ford dress shirt that hangs past her heavy thighs, unbuttoned at the collar, the thin gold locket resting against the open fabric at her throat, when he finds her. She's humming something, low and soft and almost unconscious, a melody she doesn't even remember learning. Dominic goes still in the doorway. He crosses the room slowly. Those pale, steel-gray eyes are doing something she's never seen them do before. He reaches out and traces the locket at her collarbone with one finger. The pad of his thumb rests against the warm pulse of her neck. "That melody," he says. "Where did you learn it?" "I don't know. I've always hummed it. My mother used to—" "It was my mother's." His voice is barely audible. "She died when I was 12. No one has sung it since." Nora's eyes fill. The warm hazel green goes liquid and bright, and she presses her lips together, and the tears come anyway, rolling down those full, dimpled cheeks over the light scatter of golden freckles across the bridge of her nose. He holds her, all of her. His arms wrap around her thick waist and pull her flush against him, her broad hips against his, the full, soft weight of her body pressed to his chest, her face buried in his neck. He doesn't shift his grip. He doesn't adjust. He holds on like she is exactly the right size for his arms, because she is. "You are the only person in 15 years, he says against her hair, who has made me feel like I am still human." His hands trace down her waist, her hips, the full curve of her body beneath his shirt. He pulls her closer, not away, never away, closer, and his mouth finds the birthmark on the left side of her neck just below her ear and stays there. "Every single inch," he says. She believes him. Nora stands at the window of the penthouse at dawn, wearing his shirt, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Lake Michigan is a sheet of hammered silver under early light. She doesn't hunch her shoulders. She doesn't angle herself sideways. She doesn't try to make herself smaller. She fills the frame. All 5'5", 230 pounds of her, honey blonde waves loose around her face, the gold locket warm at her throat, and she takes up every inch of that window like she was built to stand exactly there. Dominic watches her from the doorway, the same doorway where he first heard her voice, and says, "You take up every room you walk into. Don't you ever stop." 3 months later, an invitation arrives at every major business address in Chicago. Embossed ivory cardstock, gold foil lettering, the kind of paper that costs more per sheet than most people's hourly wage. The Castera Foundation Annual Gala at the Art Institute of Chicago, and the +1 on the host line reads, "Nora Calloway, Managing Director of Operations." Let that title sit in your mouth for a second. The Art Institute transforms for the evening into something that doesn't quite look real. $500,000 in event production, crystal chandeliers suspended from temporary rigging above the modern wing, each one worth more than a mid-range sedan. Moet and Chandon flowing from stations manned by white-gloved attendants. Tom Ford on the men, Valentino on the women, Cartier at every throat and wrist. The flower arrangements alone cost $14,000. $14,000 for flowers that'll be dead by Tuesday. This is the world Nora Calloway lives in now. Not because she shrunk herself down to fit through its door, because the door got wider. And then she walks in. Custom emerald Marchesa gown, size 20, tailored not to hide a single curve, but to worship every one of them. The fabric catches light along the drape of her broad hips, the sweep of her heavy thighs, the soft fullness of her waist. The neckline sits just low enough to show the thin gold chain she never removes, the tiny round locket resting against her collarbone like it always has. Her honey blonde hair is swept up, a few loose waves framing her flushed, rounded cheeks, and the scatter of golden freckles across her small, upturned nose. Hazel green eyes, steady, shoulders back, not hunched, not dipped, not apologizing. She walks in on Dominic Castera's arm, and the room turns. Not because she's thin, she isn't. Not because she changed, she didn't. The world changed around her. Every head that swivels, every whispered conversation that pauses mid-syllable, every champagne flute that freezes halfway to painted lips. That's the world catching up to what Dominic saw in a fluorescent-lit lobby 3 months ago. A woman who takes up space, and means it. Dominic moves beside her in his charcoal Tom Ford three-piece, the matte black Patek Philippe catching low light on his left wrist, pale, steel-gray eyes scanning the room with that permanently intense expression that makes billionaires nervous. His hand rests at the small of her back, not guiding, anchoring. Now here's where it gets good. Glenn Whitmore is at the gala, but not as a guest. Oh no. Glenn Whitmore, former VP of Operations at Whitmore Kessler Logistics, the man who fired Nora Calloway in front of an open-plan office and told her she was the size of the company's problems. Glenn is working tonight, event coordinator for a catering company. His logistics firm collapsed 2 months after the federal fraud charges hit. $12 million in liabilities, 0 clients. His name is professionally radioactive. He's wearing a rented suit that pulls at the shoulders and sags at the waist, and his thinning strawberry blonde hair is combed over from a low side part that fools absolutely nobody. The wire-rimmed gold glasses sit crooked on his broad, flat nose. He's carrying a tray of empty water glasses back toward the service corridor when he sees her. The color drains from his face like someone pulled a plug. Nora walks past him, doesn't slow down, doesn't glance sideways, doesn't deliver a devastating one-liner or a cold smirk or any of the revenge fantasies she probably played in her head during those weeks of eating ramen alone in a studio apartment. She just walks past him, the emerald gown catching light, the gold locket glinting at her throat, her chin level. She doesn't need to say anything. Her existence is the revenge. Glenn stands there holding empty glasses, watching the woman he called worthless accept a handshake from a tech CEO worth $900 million. That's the kind of arithmetic that breaks a man. The CEO's name is David Hale. He leans in, speaks directly to Nora, not to Dominic. He asks about her logistics algorithm. The same algorithm. The one she built on her own time at Whitmore Kessler. The one Glenn dismissed because it came from a woman he thought was too fat to be competent. Hale offers $2.2 million for a licensing deal. Nora tilts her head, considers it for exactly 3 seconds, and says she'll think about it. $2.2 million. She'll think about it. Glenn is 6 feet away, refilling water glasses at a side table, and he hears every word. Every single word. The algorithm he fired her for, the work he called worthless because of the body it came from, is now worth more than his entire bankrupt company, more than his house, more than his retirement, more than every snide comment about her weight combined and multiplied by 1,000. He sets a glass down wrong. It tips. Water spreads across white linen. Nobody notices. Nobody notices Glenn Whitmore at all anymore. Funny how that works. The orchestra shifts into something slower, something with strings and weight. Dominic extends his hand toward Nora. She hesitates. Her fingers brush the gold locket at her throat, that old nervous habit, and she murmurs, "Everyone's watching." Good. His voice is low, unhurried, absolute. Let them watch. You take up every room you walk into. That's not a flaw. That's a siege. She takes his hand. They move onto the dance floor, and she doesn't try to be smaller, doesn't angle her body to minimize her hips, or tuck her arms tight against her sides, or any of the 1,000 tiny contractions she used to perform just to exist in public. She fills the floor. Her full figure moves against him, soft curves against his lean, hard frame, and he holds her like she's the only solid thing in the building. Here's the pattern nobody talks about. Every person who made Nora feel small did so because her brilliance made them feel smaller. Every person who told her she didn't fit was terrified that she fit too well, in places they couldn't reach. The most dangerous woman in Chicago isn't dangerous because of the man beside her. She's dangerous because she can see what no one else can see. And now she's done being invisible. The gala swirls around them, music, crystal, champagne, 500 people in clothes worth more than cars. And at the center of it all, Nora catches her own reflection in the grand window overlooking Monroe Street. She sees a woman who takes up space, and for the first time in her life, she doesn't flinch. Dominic's hand finds the small of her back. "Ready?" he says. She lifts her chin. "I've been ready." If this story hit you somewhere real, subscribe, drop a like, and tell us in the comments, whose story do you want to hear next?